Okay, for people listening, watching on the live stream,
Yep, you can update CBS.
okay. People on the live stream, this is another episode of our continuing series of internal design review meetings about features for the upcoming versions of Wolfram Language. We're going to actually do several of these today. This first one is about a fairly systems level thing, HTTP import and export. So without further ado, let's get down to business here. All right, so this is about importing work files, is that correct? Or is it other kinds of
Yeah, so there's three formats here. There's work, which most of the design questions we have resolve around work, and then there's also HTTP response and request, which are pretty straightforward. So
wait a minute, we already have HTTP response and HTTP request. So what's being changed? Oh, I see, the import and export of those.
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, export string, so just to understand this, this is to actually take an HTTP request that has been produced from, for example, generate HTTP request. Is that right?
So we don't have generate HTTP request. We have generate HTTP response.
Oh, right. Yes.
But for the HTTP response exporter and importer, yes, you could. I have an example of that below. Under the HTTP response.
So
section.
How would you get an HTTP? This HTTP request is, I don't recall what, let me take
it. Yeah, the HTTP request object is also the function is the same as the constructor for that object. And so if you just type in HTTP request of Wolfram.com, you get back that summary box as the object.
Okay, but it defaults to this content type or what?
Yeah, I mean, because I didn't specify any, in the simple example I have right there, I didn't specify anything. And so, yes, I believe HTTP request defaults to that content type if you don't specify. You can also specify it in the arguments to HTTP request.
Why are we defaulting to ISO 8859-1? I mean, that's ISO Latin 1 character set. Does anybody have any idea why we're defaulting to that?
I think the reason we default to that one is because that's the least likely to break something. If you have, for example, if you have a byte sequence in there that is for some character encoding like UTF-8 or something like that, but we don't know if it's UTF-8, ISO Latin will preserve those bytes. Whereas if you try and use ASCII or something like that, those bytes will just become,
okay.
You'll lose the data.
Yeah, I understand. The interpretation of the bytes will be wrong because it has nothing to do with the extra stuff in ISO Latin 1, but it won't actually smoosh the bytes.
It won't. Yeah, you won't lose those bytes when you use ISO Latin 1.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Where do we start here? So we're looking at HTTP request and the exporting of HTTP request. That looks fine to me. Should I be looking at the documentation of the format?
There's a format page for you, or there should be.
Yeah, and I don't know how recently you updated CVS.
I just updated it. Like when this meeting started, I updated.
Okay, you're good.
However, this is not working. This is dead. Let me bring it up just in 11.2. Let's see if this works. Yeah, it does. So it's continuing to be dead in the X kernel. Okay, so get format page. I want HTTP request. All right. This seems pretty uncontroversial. Is there more to be written here? I mean,
it's just for you to review, and if it looks good, then we can move on. It's Ian and I wrote this the other day. So.
There's no special options or.
And what is the MIME support? How does the MIME support work?
So there isn't a MIME type for HTTP request. However, the body of a request could have a MIME type. And that
I understand that, but is that encoded in the HTTP request, or is that encoded? Is that in the
so if you look
content type? It's the content.
So
All right.
If you set the content type option in the example I have over there to UTF-8 or something, you'll see another line show up that says content type, UTF-8, or I don't remember exactly what it is.
Okay. And why we should use export string here, by the way, in this example.
Export string.
Yeah, I mean, don't put in a file. I mean, my gosh. Just show the string explicitly. Okay. In that case, I mean, the examples that you give here look like the right examples to give here.
Okay, I can put those in instead.
Seems right to me. Okay, user with a socket to make an HTTP request.
Yep. So this is kind of like
there.
Very basic.
This should also be in the examples. Write string to the socket of the. Now, is that write a string or write a byte array?
If you want to do write a byte array, you could use binary write sock export byte array. That also works fine.
Okay. But this is writing that. Okay. What is this?
This is just a little bit of hacky code I have because there's a bug with the socket reading. And read string should just work. However, there's a bug in Xkernel and it's not working. So this works around that bug. But
okay, so I mean, it would normally be read string on the socket. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yep, that's all it would be. Read string of the socket, and then you just do import string of that, and you get back your object.
So if I did import byte array here, we have import byte array, don't we?
Yep.
So if I did import byte array, I wouldn't need to do the byte array to string, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
I just included byte array to string to show what that looks like if you wanted to see that. But it's rather unwieldy.
Yeah, it's our website, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. We probably should have a sample website that we can use for these examples that has much more trivial HTML on it.
Yeah, I mean, we have example data.wolfram.com. We could have, I mean, there is there's a page that's just all the pages is just a listing of all 50 states. It's like example data.wolfram.com / I think it's just /50 states.txt. Let me find that, but I think that would be a good.
Yeah, we can add any other thing there. I mean, it's those are examples.
Yeah, I see this. I mean, you can use this if you want to, or you can just have something which is even more trivial than that just says, this is an example or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would do. I mean, I just don't think you should have any meaningful content there. There's already a long list that will kind of snarl up an in-notebook example. Okay, let's keep going.
So do you want to unfuturize or do you want to wait with unfuturizing this?
You can unfuturize this. Go ahead. You can unfuturize. I'm not going to do it because there's a bunch of crud here that needs to be removed.
Yeah, that gets filtered out, I think.
Yeah,
you want me to do the honors of unfuturizing it?
No, I can do it. I'm just
okay. Fine.
Usually you're the.
I know, but I feel like this one needs its examples changed and all that kind of thing. Okay, HTTP response. Let's take a look at this. Why are you doing a quiet on that HTTP response?
Again, the Xkernel is. I mean, you can remove the quiet, then you get a giant message spew. It still works. The message spew has been reported. It should be fixed soon, but. If you just want to run it. It still works. There's just random messages that show up.
Okay, export string. Bad request happens because that wasn't a number, right?
Yep. So if you change that to a number, then you should get,
a meaningful HTTP response.
Yep.
Okay, fine. Okay, looks good. Don't see a problem with any of this. I mean, let me just try it just for fun. Oh, come on.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure why that's not working. I guess I didn't actually try the correct case.
Well, I think it requires a string, right? Okay. I mean, this would be what happens if I just say generate HTTP response of something completely trivial? Like,
Yeah, I mean yeah.
Delayed of now. Okay, there I've got something meaningful. Well, we need to find out what happened to that. I don't know. I'm not aware of that syntax for generate HTTP response with the query in there.
Yeah, that's the second 2-arg form.
I thought it would actually be an HTTP response. I mean, an HTTP request wrapper in there, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I think it should be. I filed the bug because it does. If you put a HTTP request as the second argument, it actually doesn't work. It fails
Okay.
over.
All right. Fine. Okay.
But that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So here now we've got that HTTP response 200. What on earth is all this junk? What is all that stuff?
That's just the HTML. So you see in the middle right there, begin page content. That's just all the HTML that was generated just for that string. If you did, I think delayed takes a format argument, in which case you could specify, you just want like raw text instead of the full. Yeah. So if you do delayed, comma.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. That's much better. Yep. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's continue. Okay.
Work.
Yep. Okay.
So we'll have a file for work in the example data files, but this is just a one that's run on the archive.org site that returns a data set like this.
Okay. So that's our default thing, is to return a data set from the walk file.
Yeah. There's a format page for work, so you can open that up too. And the default element is data, which contains a few specific headers that we recognize and are kind of required to be there, such as the work version, the URL, the date, the content type, the payload. I think there's one other one. If you scroll over to the side, or maybe it's just payload. Oh, yeah, record ID, yeah, which is kind of like a UUID for work stuff. So those are the specific ones that if you just get data, the default element, it gives you a data set with all of this stuff. And the payload can vary depending upon which, what type of thing is in each element of the work file. So for example, some of those ellipses are HTTP requests and responses. So click on that, you can see the request.
It doesn't. It's not alive here, but I made it alive now.
Yeah. And some of them are also just like metadata that are generated with the work.
What did I just get? I'm sorry, I'm confused here. I see. There's I jumped up there. Okay. That's
one of the payloads.
Okay. So I see. So the walk file contains various things that happen during the operation of a web crawler.
Exactly.
This is the URL, and this one apparently didn't have a URL because that is simply a thing that is describing the version number of the walk program or something like this.
Exactly. If you click on the payload for that one, it'll just tell you, hey, we're using this software to run the work. We're running it on this date against this website.
Okay.
And so that element in the work file is just like metadata about here's how I ran the crawl.
Okay. All right.
And all the other things are actual crawl things.
Okay. Default data set with specific headers. We should talk about that. Raw data, all headers. I understand that. No interpretation. So if I say this comma headers,
The difference is in how interpreted it is, like dates are interpreted or they're raw as strings.
So headers doesn't do any interpretation of the values. It'll just extract certain specific ones and give you back the string as it was found in the file. Whereas data will interpret stuff into, say, for example, a date object.
Why is it called headers? Why is this called headers?
That made sense to me. I guess maybe it doesn't make sense.
Well, explain it.
So I mean, my thinking was that, the default thing, that's data. That's what you want normally to work with. That's your data set. And then if you go down to the next kind of level down, which is raw data, that's all of the stuff we curate and say, here's a specific version, here's the work type, etc. But then here's all the other random headers that might be there, right? Because there's no like listing of headers. There could be any random thing in that file.
Headers as in column names.
Yes, column names. Yes.
Headings. Headings.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess you can.
They're called headers in HTTP and work parlance.
Okay, I'm still confused. This is the walk file, and normally, in the case of, so it has, you've got version URL, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is your data thing. Okay.
Yep.
In raw data, let's just try it. It's running. What is it doing? Is it?
It might take a second. Oh, okay. So raw data is not a data set. I'm not sure if it should be. I think probably yes. I might have just forgotten to change that. But you can see, once the data set loads. So you can see with raw data that work concurrent to and some of these other, work IP address or payload digest, all these random things, they aren't like required to be there. And so sometimes they're there, sometimes they're missing.
Okay. What's the difference in that and headers?
So with raw data, we still attempt to perform interpretation on values. For example, dates become date objects, whereas headers, there's no interpretation of the values.
It's just the text. So
there's okay. It's a terrible name for it, if I might say so, because you've had to explain it to me for a while here.
So headers is a subset of raw headers, and
raw headers? No, raw. Oh, raw headers.
Yeah.
Why are they being called headers? It's because they're not the payload, but you've included the payload here.
The payload is separate from the headers.
But it's in the headers table here.
Yeah, I guess that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. Okay. All right, let's look at the cases here. So there's okay, let's also talk about how people are going to use this. Right, so they've got a piece of a crawl, and so for example, we'd like to feed it into our text search system. How would we do it? So let's say I take this and I want to feed it into the text search system. So I would, for example, take this thing here, and I would say, somewhat confusingly, I would say of this %9 all comma payload, right? Okay. So whatever these are, okay, so those are HTTP responses. Wow.
You probably want to select just the responses. So if you do, select.
Headers response.
Yeah, exactly. You just get the response ones, and then those gives you all the HTTP response objects, and then each of those you just want the bodies. Yep, and so then if you do, I think %all, percent of, and then you're running a function on the data set where the function is just getting the body of each of those HTTP responses. Then you would feed that into text.
What's that?
It's going to be a lot of That's 800. How many? 261. Is that right? It's going to be a lot of
Yeah, okay.
things.
Let's just take the first 5 or something.
But does that make sense?
That's, by the way, a very infelicitous display for the data set, and that would be worth reporting. That seems totally wrong. That this HTTP response successfully got displayed, but these did not. Can somebody report that? Go ahead.
So I think the reason that happened is because the byte count of that HTTP response is like very, very little, right? Because the 301.
No, I get it. It's an incorrect heuristic. The heuristic is saying because the underneath byte count is big, don't display it, just display it with ellipses. But the fact is, in this particular case, the displayed object would actually be quite small because it has a summary box, right? So the mistake is that the data set display thing is not aware of summary boxes. Make sense?
I see. I'll report that.
Okay. That would ultimately go to Xavier, I think. Okay, so then these particular things we can say, body of each of these things, if I'm not mistaken, and then we'll get welcome to the archive. Okay, fine.
If you wanted, you could also try, I see 2 of those are images, which probably isn't very useful, but you could try importing the HTML string.
That's been a while. Slow down the Ask Jeeves crawler. Maybe we should point out to Brewster that that's a little bit out of date. In fact, I feel like sending mail to Brewster right now. Let me just copy that out and I'll put it in a piece of mail here.
Well, when's the crawl from? If the crawl was done in 2008, then it's...
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. When is this crawl from? It must be much more recent because Common Crawl hasn't been going that long.
Well, this isn't from the Common Crawl. This is just an example work file that was easy to access.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this is completely irrelevant then. Okay, fine. So this might have actually been from 2008.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. This was not a freshly cooked thing where the archive is out of date.
I did send you by email the www.wolfram.com work file if you want to just play around with a different set.
No, I don't need to. I think I understand this. So let's just understand what the minimal code is to do a text search based on this, right? Has somebody walked through that? Because that's what, that's a typical case here. And I'm wondering whether there are some elements that we want. Okay, so
I think as I said, you don't want to just grab all the HTTP responses. You want to grab all the HTML ones. And then I assume because if you're doing a text search, you only care about the actual text content of the HTML and not, for example, the HTML code, right?
Right.
In which case, then you would need to run a further import on the HTML that was returned to get just the data, just the text content of that page.
Right. The fact is, we could provide that. We could have a thing called web plain text, for example.
As you mean as a column in the data set, or?
No, I'm suggesting that an import format will be web plain text data set. That would be essentially what you need for to do it, to train it, to text search, which would consist of the fields that were the URL, the plain text, and maybe some other information about dates, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, would we filter out elements that aren't, for example, image files?
Yeah, that's what we would do. If it says web plain text data set, that's what we would do. If we say web image data set, then we would get images. These seem like the useful things to be able to get from this walk file.
Okay. Yeah, that's doable. We can look at
So that in this particular case, it will be URL, image. Honestly, actually, the images. Okay, alt text. Text, associated text, maybe, and dates. Or we could just say alt text since it's web stuff, right? That's what we're talking about here, alt text. And we might.
I don't I mean, it might be hard to get the alt text, right? Because the alt text is defined on the page where that image exists, but we don't get the image from the page.
Okay. Well, does it have the refer URL?
I mean, in some cases, maybe. Not always, because this could just be any random web page, and that's just if.
No,
if
I understand that the crawler might have been pointed at the random web page, but if the crawler was doing a hierarchical crawl, then as part of the assembly of the walk file, it might know where it came from.
Yeah, true.
Okay, but let's keep going on to the other more basic things. These are more, let's talk about the very basic ones. So what you have here in the basic case is what you claim is sort of the minimal walk file thing, which is, I mean, that is a very irrelevant thing here. That version number, I mean, that probably should be far to the right, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's the walk version, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, that crawl date will also be pretty irrelevant, because that crawl date is going to be pretty much, for a typical walk file, the crawl date will be the same for everything.
Yeah, I mean, you can see right here, like the only difference in these dates is just like a few seconds.
No, I understand that. I understand that because it was a crawler going through.
Yeah.
So to my mind, okay.
Can you import just specific headers? Like if you just want URL and content type and payload, is that easy to do?
Yeah, we could say, only take specific columns out of the data set. That's very trivial.
Well, let's
specifying that with import. I mean, like saying I want, data, but I don't, I just want specific columns. Or do you just do that afterwards?
There's the list of things that we've got here. Okay.
And if you do the one you did for raw data and look at the keys, you'll see a bunch of other randomly named things.
That was raw data, okay.
%11, it looks like.
%12.
Or %12, yeah, as a data set.
Okay, this is unbelievably full of inconsistencies, right? What is the okay. So the walk file name is the original file name from which all these things came. Is that right?
Yep. So if you're running across a large data set, which each file is like a gigabyte or something, you can identify which part of the crawl based upon that file name.
Okay. Content length. Okay. Payload, fine. Okay, so walk date. What is walk type?
So walk type is kind of like the actual HTTP request to response has a content type of say UTF-8, ISO Latin 1, whatever. There's also a walk type which says this one is a HTTP request, this is a HTTP response, this is metadata about how I'm running the crawl, this is a DNS request, various other. It's kind of more of a meta content type. Like, what kind of thing is the payload?
Right. I don't think that's irrelevant though to delivering something that's useful here.
Right.
Okay. All right. So let's make some suggestions about what we want. Different cases of what we want here. So what we already discussed here were these things wherever we put them of where did I just put these? Here we go. Okay. So that's your current list, which I want to try to edit a bit of the import types, right?
Yep.
Import elements. Okay, so let's talk about, so I think there's one, the default probably, I don't think it's the right thing to get rid of that walk type, because I think that you might very well want to
filter on that.
yes, depending on what those are and whether we curate them. What are the walk types?
Okay.
I mean, are there?
Yeah, so there's specific documented ones. It follows the MIME type convention, but they have like some kind of MIME type extensions. For example, if you look at the HTTP request, it's like application / HTTP semicolon.
But wait, isn't that content type?
So content type is inside the so yeah, there's a hierarchy, right? So work type says this is one element of the crawl of the archive, and that element can have a content type, or rather a work type of HTTP request, HTTP response, work metadata, stuff like that. And then inside that you get to the payload, and that payload also has its own content type of UTF-8, of MIME type of image.
This content type is then pulled out of the payload as an informational thing, sort of exposed on the surface. Is that right?
Yes, the content type is more specific to sorry. Okay, work type says what kind of object it is. Content type says stuff like character encoding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, like it's an HTTP response is what you mean by walk type. Is that right?
Yes, that is what I mean, yes.
Okay, so, I mean, what you're proposing here, what are we doing for other formats that have these kinds of composite? What's a good comparable format? Somebody here?
EML is somewhat similar.
Okay, let's look at that one.
Yeah, I just put the format page on the chat, on your chat, in case you want to look at that.
Which format page?
The work format.
What do you mean? I mean, you mean some kind of standard or what?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be on this chat. Okay.
You don't have to pull it up. I'm just putting it out there. I mean, there's lots of different types and things in that specification that don't show up yet with that one URL you've looked at. Just so you're aware of that. There's different versions and different,
Okay. I would propose that we have a thing called raw data set, which returns basically in the same order as the walk thing. This would be the full data set of raw walk fields. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think the analogous one that I have is raw data, except raw data is a list of associations, but it should be a data set.
Okay.
So raw data set. So, okay, question about raw data set. Should we perform interpretation of the values, i.e. turn dates into date objects, things like that?
Yeah, I'm thinking. I think yes, but I think we should have another one that's called something like this.
So raw string data set is then similar to what we have for the headers element right now, where you don't perform interpretation of the values.
That's what I'm thinking. And I mean, I think, I could imagine one called data set that is some kind of subset of fields.
Yep. So I think that's what I have as data, right?
That's like what I think you have as data too, right?
Yep. Okay.
Data set of raw walk fields with values values interpreted. Oops, values interpreted. Do you think this is the right naming? Arnaud, do you want to comment on this?
Sorry, I was on mute. I think that's good. Yeah, that's better than what we had for headers.
Yes, definitely. That was incomprehensible. So now the only question here, so in this case, raw data set would be the names that the walk system gives to each of those fields. In other words, we don't try to cook those names.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
And that's important if you want to, you know, if you need speed, like if it's a big file and, you know, the parsing may be slow. So,
Well, yeah, but it's also just people know what those.
yeah, you know
Yeah.
what you want, right? You know what you want, and you just extract as quickly as possible. Yeah.
So now let me just look at any other things. I mean, the web plain text data set seems highly useful. And, you know, I think a lot of the users will actually want to just do things like this.
So question, the web plaintext data set, do we want, I mean, that has data set at the end, whereas these other ones have raw data set with data, or, oh, wait, never mind. It's consistent, sorry.
Yeah, I think
I'm
so.
reading backwards.
Okay, because I think those are the, okay, that's the most common form of cooking, is this. Now, we might also want something as simple as images that will just be a straight extract all the images and give me a list.
As Wolfram Language images, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is also what web image data set should do. I mean, those are all Wolfram Language images.
Right.
Okay, so the one thing we have to talk about now is what subset of fields is in the thing called data set. Okay, so what you have right now is this, right?
Yep.
Well, actually, I'm totally confused because, oh, I see. The first line was a non-typical line. Okay, so the proposal would be, it would go URL content type. Can't we cook the content type? Do we have a representation of that content type as an entity? If we don't, we probably should have.
I don't think we have one.
I think that would be a good thing for us to do, is to get MIME types, because we have a bunch of that stuff in connection with, I mean, we do have format types as entities somewhere. I'd like to make that suggestion to Alan and friends that we curate the MIME types and make them into entities.
Yeah. Carla, can you make a note of that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Let's see. So then, where were we? Content type. Do we want content length, content size? Is that useful here?
What is content size?
It's your content length thing. It was the thing that was a field called content length, wasn't it?
Oh, right. So content length as a header is just the number of bytes, which I don't think is useful because you don't know that information going into the file. But once you have it like parsed like this, you just do length of, you know, whatever the thing is. So I don't think it's useful.
Okay, I don't see that it should be called payload. Given that it says content type, why not just say content here?
That would be consistent, yes.
Okay. So date, and then
should we maybe name date such that, you know, it's like, because it's the date that thing was requested, not like the date returned by that object. Should we maybe name that like request date or crawl date or something?
Well, you don't know it's a crawl.
Well, you also don't know there's a request.
Fine, so that's why we shouldn't call it either of those.
Okay.
We should say,
Just call it
hold on a second. Well, actually, the very obvious thing would be content. No, content date is ambiguous.
Yeah, because it's not the date that the content was like created or something. It was access date, maybe?
Crawl date.
No, we don't know it's a crawl. Access
We'll go access.
or creation date. No, access date is best. Yeah, access date makes sense. Okay, walk version. And what is the record ID?
So record ID is like kind of like the UUID for it. It's used, for example, when you have like, I don't know, for some reason you're like looking at a 1 gigabyte file and you decide to split it up into smaller work elements. You can mark those as being for the same page with a duplicated record ID.
Okay, so is it fair to call it walk record ID?
Yep, that's fair. You shouldn't call it UUID because you could have the same record ID show up, in which case it's the same.
I understand. Okay, do we think we have a conclusion then here? Is this everything that we were asking about? So this is, Carlo, where would you like me to put this, or should I just send this? Hold on, let's just, Carlo, do you know where this is supposed to go?
I was trying.
engineering.
Yeah, that would be good.
Not ILD. We're never going to find it there. Do you have a core software engineering folder?
I don't think he does.
I do actually, but I also have import export, which seems like a reasonable place to put this.
Okay.
Was it under ILD? I'm not sure where that.
Yeah, it was under the ILD section. But I can also mail this to you. Okay. Anything else that we need to cover in this discussion? Yeah.
So let's see. Okay, so the kind of like useful curated ones will just be plain text and images, where plain text is not the HTML, it's the actual text content.
Oh, well, okay. Wait a minute. This is, I mean, we could have one called plain text that is, but the problem is that the plain text really wants to be in a data set that contains URL information. Because it's not particularly useful to just say, it might be useful, but it's much less likely. With images, the typical thing is, these are all supposed to be images of dogs or something coming from this website, and just give me all the images. I actually think, yeah, I mean, it's going to get more complicated where, I mean, the case that is going to be of interest for the images is what was the thing that pointed to that image? What was the context of the image?
Yeah, I mean, I think theoretically that information should be available because there are, for example, like work metadata things where it just says like out links, like after it performs the request, it computes what are all of the links from this page to the next place. And then it will put that inside the work file, and then we'll actually go to those next pages. At least, that's kind of how the common crawl work files work. So
okay, so another thing that would be conceivable based on other kinds of input formats is, but I don't think it's going to be very useful for this, is being able to ask specifically just for access dates, for example.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? So you don't think
just
we should have access date?
Well, no, I'm saying that, I mean, there will be, so I'm not sure whether we want this images thing right now.
What I'm saying is that I think that will be hard to, because I can return all of the HTTP responses that were just of an image, image content type. That's simple. That makes sense. But how useful is that, I guess? Yeah,
I don't think that's particularly useful. Let's not worry about that. My question is whether if you say import blah blah blah, blah 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 walk file, and then you just want the access dates. Okay.
Right.
I mean, which of these was one actually going to want? One might want access dates, one might want URLs. Those are two things that seem actually useful.
I feel like content, right? You just want all the content.
But you could specify it as a sub-element, and like you say the main thing you want, and then you just specify the list of fields that you want. I think that's how that's typically done. With
fine.
Formats. We don't have that as a top-level thing. Those are
sub-elements.
Yeah.
So you can say access date there.
Yeah, I think there's examples in other import-export formats that kind of do it like that.
Yes, I think so too.
We can study that.
Okay.
Okay. can we declare victory on this particular item?
Yep. And then we can, if we do everything here, we can unfuturize this one as well.
Yep.
Yes.
And then just so quick question about the example data for work stuff. Should we? I was just going to run a crawl of Wolfram.com and then include that as the example
it'll
data.
be big. It'll be huge. Well, how
I mean,
do you
it'll be.
For examples,
Well,
let's use example data and just kind of put examples on there. Let's keep it small and I mean.
Well, I think we need some diversity probably to get interesting walk data. I think that's sort of fraught with weirdness because Wolfram.com will change over time. The example will not change. The full Wolfram.com website is millions of pages.
Yeah, let's create examples that are easy to understand and not trivial, but some, that have educational value.
Well, maybe we can get an example. What would be a convenient thing?
I mean, we could just put an example like example data.wolfram.com/work that just has some simple content and like
yeah. I mean, look, I think a cute example would be if there is a copy somewhere out there on the archive or something of some very early website, perhaps even our very early website. Perhaps a website of ours from 1995 or something, which will be small, kind of amusing, and doesn't need to change with time. Get what I'm saying?
Okay, I can look into if we have
that.
access
That should
to
be. I mean, we should have it, and it should be on the Internet Archive.
Okay.
Probably as a walk file.
Probably, yeah.
Right. So then we've got, then we can just have it from nature, so to speak.
We can look into that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it because that way we don't have to worry about, it's an amusing example, but we don't have to worry about it changing.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm sending this this to you guys, and then let's wrap this meeting. And I think some of you are in the next meeting about
all of us.
Yeah,
really?
All of us.
Okay, great. All right, so I think for those on the live stream, this is we will sign off from this meeting, and it will be back in a moment.